There are moments in life when you stand in front of a door and simply can't bring yourself to knock. Not because your hand is heavy, not because you forgot what you were going to say, but because if you knock on that door, something will change forever. And you spent whole weeks trying to keep anything from changing. And the problem wasn't the door. It was what knocking on it said about who I was. I was in the hallway of our apartment at 11:30 at night, my hand raised 2 centimeters from the wood, my heart pounding so hard I wondered if it could be heard on the other side. The hallway was small, a little over a yard wide, those middle-class apartment walls that seemed to have absorbed a decade of other stories before mine. The hallway light was off. I hadn't turned it on because turning the light on meant making a decision, and I still hadn't managed to make the decision to be there. Mateus's bedroom door, of someone I had spent whole weeks trying not to think about. Locked. That's what I had imagined night after night, turning it into a symbol for everything I couldn't name. But he himself had written, in a message I reread about 10 times that day, with a clarity that hurt, "The door isn't locked." I'll tell you how I got there. Not because the beginning is pretty, but because if you've ever stood in a hallway like that, hand raised and heart beating too loud to pretend none of it was real, you'll want to know what happens when you knock. I'm Lucas Andrade, I'm 24, a freelance designer, and I'd arrived in Belo Horizonte with 2 suitcases, a portfolio on my laptop, and the conviction that city life would just be a matter of management. Find clients, pay rent, keep enough distance from anything that might destabilize me. I grew up in the Minas countryside, in a small town that always smelled like wet earth in February, in an evangelical family where certain things simply didn't have names. They weren't violently forbidden, they were just non-existent, absent from the vocabulary, off the map of possibilities that place drew for you. I learned very early, with the quiet efficiency of lessons no one taught explicitly, that there were right ways to be and wrong ways to be, and that you were responsible for fitting into the right ones. I came to BH out of a mix of ambition and escape. At the time, I only called it ambition. That was easier. The apartment was what I could afford, with the first clients I'd booked before I left. 2 bedrooms, a middle-class neighborhood, 4 flights of stairs in a building that probably needed repairs 5 years ago, but had the right price. And a roommate I'd found on a rent-splitting app. His profile showed a guy playing guitar in a bar, messy hair, focused expression. The description he'd written was, independent musician, play local bars, give guitar lessons, cook when I have patience, never when I don't, organized in the essentials, chaotic in the rest. If you have a problem with guitar at 11 at night, this will be a formative experience for one of us. I thought, this guy is going to be a problem. I hadn't calculated how many different ways that could be true. We messaged on the app for 2 days. He asked if I cooked, if I was the type to keep track of groceries, if I had a problem with visitors. I said I could cook basics, didn't care about that stuff, and visitors were fine depending on how often. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji and said the room was mine. Just like that. No formal interview, no rules posted on the fridge, none of that weird ceremony some listings do like it's a job application. What I expected was a transaction. A cordial, distant stranger, me in my bubble, him in his, a quiet, functional cohabitation. A logistical problem solved with minimal human contact. What I found was Mateus Viana. The day I arrived was a Thursday in February with that late afternoon light BH has, half golden, half heavy. The kind of light that makes everything feel more significant than it is. I climbed the 4 flights with my 2 suitcases, stopped in front of apartment 402, breathed, and knocked. When the door opened, my first thought was, this guy is going to be a problem in a way I didn't predict. Mateus Viana was 26, about 6 feet tall, with the kind of shoulders you get from actually doing stuff instead of going to a gym. Brown hair that clearly wasn't following any instructions. A smile that took over his whole face without asking. He was an independent musician, played local bars and gave guitar lessons, the kind of life people think sounds romantic from a distance but is complicated up close. He lived it though, with this calm that said he'd actually figured out how to make it work. He wore shorts and an old faded band t-shirt I didn't recognize, barefoot in an apartment he moved through like it had always been his home. There was a cup of coffee in his hand and he looked like he hadn't expected me to show up right then, but was glad I had. Lucas? He said my name as if he already knew me, as if I were a friend coming back from a trip, not a stranger who had seen exactly 3 photos of him on an app. Come in, I'll show you the apartment. And he did. The whole apartment, with that particular generosity of someone who feels at home anywhere and automatically wants you to feel the same. He showed me where the circuit breaker was if the power went out. It's in a closet near the door. Looks obvious, but it's not. It took me 3 days to find it when I moved in. He explained that the bathroom faucet had a specific angle so it wouldn't splash. If you open it all the way, it sprays the wall. I don't know why. The sink has a personality of its own. He told me about the neighbor on the 2nd floor, an old man named Raimundo, retired from the postal service, who had 3 dogs whose names Mateus knew by heart, who sometimes came up to borrow sugar or oil or occasionally company, and that it was easier to keep a spare on the top shelf than to explain you'd run out. He's a good guy, Mateus said, with the affectionate precision of someone who really pays attention to the people around him. He just needs an ear sometimes. His apartment smells like talcum powder and stale coffee, and he plays accordion on Sunday mornings. While he talked, he made a fresh pot of coffee. The previous one was cold, but he made a new one anyway, with that specific kettle that sat on the edge of the counter and that I would come to know by sound before I even learned it existed. He asked if I wanted some. I said yes before I could decide whether I did. "Tell me a bit," he said, placing the cup in front of me with the naturalness of someone who has always hosted guests. "Where are you from? What do you do?" I answered with the minimum necessary. "Designer. Interior of Minas Gerais, a small town you probably don't know. Freelancer. I came to get access to bigger clients." Mateus nodded as if every answer were interesting. Not with the polite kind of fake interest, with the genuine manner of someone who actually listens, who processes what you said before replying, who asks follow-up questions that show they were paying attention. He asked what kind of design I did, whether I preferred working with established brands or startups, if I already had any clients in Belo Horizonte, or was starting from scratch. He answered briefly, "The bar covers rent, lessons cover the rest, whatever's left goes to recording," with the calm of someone who'd built a life that doesn't need anyone else's validation to be real. That bothered me more than anything else that afternoon. The calm, the complete lack of any need to impress me, or to appear more than he was. Mateus Viana existed with the quiet confidence of someone utterly at peace with simply existing. When I went to my room to set up my things, I already knew I'd made a mistake. Not the kind of mistake you undo, the kind you learn to manage. I started managing it the next morning. Have you ever tried to avoid someone you couldn't stop thinking about? It's not what it sounds like. Avoiding someone, truly, requires constant attention to that person. It sounds paradoxical, but it works exactly like that. You monitor patterns so you don't cross paths with them. You learn the times to find the empty spaces. You build a mental map so detailed of someone's movements that, in the end, you know more about that person's routine than you probably know about your own. Mateus had a routine that seemed like it had never occurred to him to plan. He'd wake around 8, sometimes 8:30, never before 7:30 unless he had something scheduled. Coffee, always coffee, never tea, made the same slow way with that kettle. The smell was the first thing that reached me when he got to the kitchen before I did. That specific smell of filtered coffee cutting through my closed bedroom door with this irritating clarity. An olfactory intimacy I didn't ask for and couldn't refuse. He'd spend part of the morning on guitar or working on his laptop, or answering messages with the calm focus of someone not in a hurry. He'd leave around noon, sometimes for guitar lessons at students' places, sometimes to the bar for rehearsal, sometimes for some social thing I couldn't identify by the sounds. Back in early evening, dinner, sometimes cooked, sometimes takeout, more guitar after dinner, bed at a reasonable hour. It was a real person's routine, irritatingly legible, irritatingly human. What I hadn't accounted for were the things that happened in the spaces between those moments. The small presences he left around the apartment, even when he wasn't there. The notes on the fridge. They weren't serious messages about groceries or quiet hours. They were observations. The kind of thing you write when you think someone might laugh with no need for a response. No attempt to start something. I found one on a pink notepad held by a duck magnet. I ate the last egg. Sorry about the omelet situation. I'll buy more tomorrow, or later, but I will buy them. M. Another. The bathroom cabinet door is loose. I tightened the screw, but you'll have to do it again in 2 weeks. Or we just live with it. Doors get to make their own rules. M. And Raimundo asked if the new tenant was friendly. I said yes. Hope I wasn't lying. M. I would read those notes, fold them more carefully than necessary and throw them away. And then I'd keep thinking about them longer than I should have. Then there was the guitar. Mateus played well. Not flashy. Not the kind you'd imagine at a concert with spotlights. The kind that makes you stop what you're doing without meaning to. Instrumental passages mixed with improvised melody. Some familiar, some just his, carrying through his bedroom wall with impossible clarity. I'd work while it drifted in uninvited. Once I caught myself staring at the same screen for 11 minutes, just waiting for the chord I knew was coming. The one after the sequence he always repeated. I knew it. I was waiting for it. I told myself it was a focus problem from a space not built for work. I bought headphones that weekend. Good ones. Noise canceling. Professional grade. Got home, put them on, opened the project with the deadline. Sat in the artificial silence those foam cups make. Functional. Efficient. Empty in a way I took a while to understand was different from peace. Was the noise I was trying to cancel the guitar? Or was it what I felt when I heard it? The headphones didn't fix the kitchen. The kitchen was unavoidable. You need to eat. And a small kitchen in a 2-bedroom means 2 bodies occupying the same space constantly. A constant negotiation of how close you're standing. Mateus didn't think about any of that. He'd come in, open the fridge, apologize if he bumped me with an "oops, sorry," so casual I couldn't tell if he meant it or if it was just reflex. He'd ask what I was doing, comment on life with the ease of someone who thought talking was normal between 2 adults sharing an apartment. Which it was. But I wasn't working with normal logic. I answered. I couldn't not answer without sounding rude. And then I'd look for reasons to go to another room before the conversation went too far. It worked. For about 10 days, it worked with an efficiency I mistook for health. On the 11th day, I made coffee and found myself waiting for the guitar that never came. Mateus had left early. The apartment was completely silent. And I was standing in front of his bedroom wall with coffee in my hand, not sure when that had happened. I went back to the kitchen. I drank the coffee. I opened my laptop to work and stared at the screen for 20 minutes, without being able to start anything. The following days had the same texture. Functional on the outside, completely hollow on the inside. Then the storm came. Not metaphorical. It was the February rain Belo Horizonte gets when the sky decides to dump enough water to flood half the city at once. I saw the clouds building early in the afternoon. That fast darkening you get in a Minas Gerais summer. I'd planned to get home before it hit. Didn't make it. I walked in at 3 on a Friday afternoon soaked from the waist down, my sneakers making that desperate squeaking sound with every step, and the rain outside had become a solid wall that made the street invisible through the living room window. Mateus was there. He had a laptop open on an improvised coffee table made from a cardboard box and an open requesón pizza beside him. From that particular neighborhood place with the green box I would come to recognize, which he clearly had ordered before the rain started. The kind of planning you get from someone who knows the local weather. He looked at me, looked at my state, looked back at me. "Good storm," he said, as if that comment was enough about the state of things. "Yeah," I said. I went to my room, changed clothes, put the soaked sneakers on the windowsill to dry, which would be pointless, but it was all I had. Opened the laptop to work. The rain beat against the window with an intensity that made concentrating an overly ambitious project. In 20 minutes of trying, I managed to produce exactly nothing. Mateus knocked on my door. 3 polite knocks. "There's pizza left," he said when I opened it. He was leaning against the frame with his usual casualness. "And I'm putting on a movie. You don't have to watch if you're working, but if you want, the pizza's there, and the movie will be good." I looked at the rain at the window, looked at the laptop where I hadn't written a single thing, looked at him. "All right," I said. 5 minutes. I stayed for 2 hours. Time works differently with someone who doesn't need to fill every silence. Mateus picked a European thriller with Portuguese subtitles. The kind you can't explain the plot of without sounding complicated. But that makes perfect sense while you're watching. We sat on that couch with pizza between us and the rain outside and that closed-in afternoon light that only happens when the weather's heavy, neither day nor night, making everything feel more intimate than the hour should allow. At one point, I commented on a camera choice in a specific scene, how the low angle completely changed the power dynamic between the two characters. Mateus looked at the screen and said, "Wow, I hadn't noticed that." After a quiet pause, without making a show of having thought it, "You pay a lot of attention to things like that." "It's part of the job," I said. "But you do it even when you're not working," he said. It wasn't a question. It was an observation. The way he said it, with that calm of someone who notices things and doesn't need to make a ceremony of having noticed, left me still for a second. "Maybe," I said. He kept looking at the screen. Then he started talking, not asking permission, not announcing that he was going to speak, simply letting thoughts come out with the ease of someone who thinks aloud as a way to process. He talked about his family, about coming out at 19, at a Sunday dinner when he thought the timing was right and realized he'd miscalculated. About his father, who didn't speak to him for a year, a silence he described as that kind of silence you can measure in centimeters during lunch. About his mother, who had been by his side from the start, the anchor through the hard years. About how his relationship with his father was better now, but still had that don't talk about it thing he had learned to navigate. Not with resentment, but with the pragmatism of someone who understood that certain relationships work under certain rules, and that accepting the rules is the difference between having the relationship or not having it. He said this to the ceiling, pizza in hand, like he was commenting on the weather. No weight to it, no need for validation, no expectation that I'd share back. It was a way of being I'd rarely encountered. Someone completely at home with their own story, who doesn't need anyone else to accept it for it to be real. I listened, without revealing anything about myself. At the end of the movie, the rain outside lighter now, Mateus turned a bit toward me and asked, with that specific casualness I still hadn't learned to decode fully, "Tell me one thing. Do you have someone? A girlfriend? A boyfriend? I don't know. Any reason to go back to the small town on weekends?" My heart did something strange in my chest, as if it had tripped on an unexpected step. "No," I said. My voice came out more controlled than I deserved. "I came here alone. I don't have anyone here, and what I had back there stayed behind when I moved. All technically true. All elaborately incomplete." He nodded, logging a data point, putting it somewhere. Then he looked at the window where the rain still fell, weaker, almost resolved. "I got out of a relationship about 4 months ago. It wasn't horrible, one of those breakups you understand when it happens, but that leaves the apartment quiet in a way you didn't expect. Sometimes the city feels too big when you're used to having someone to tell things to at the end of the day." I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. He wasn't asking, he was thinking aloud, which was something Mateus did without expecting mandatory reciprocation. He just let the thoughts exist in the space between two people. When I looked back, he was looking at me, not in a way I could name, not curiosity, not evaluating, not the objectifying stare you learn to recognize. It was simpler and harder at once. Real attention, focused. A second that lasted too long to be casual. "Better go to sleep," he said, getting up with that easy movement of someone who doesn't carry anything heavy in their body. "I have class early tomorrow, a new student who's 10 and thinks he's going to learn Metallica in the 3rd lesson." I made a sound that could be called a laugh. He went to the bedroom. I stayed on the couch for another 15 minutes after he left. The rain had stopped completely. The room was quiet. The empty pizza box sat there, and I was trying to figure out why my chest still felt tight. Why that gray after-the-storm light coming through the window felt heavier than it should. I told myself it was tiredness. The normal disorientation of someone new in a new city. A completely reasonable response to a situation that wasn't complicated. I went to sleep convinced I'd succeeded in convincing myself. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Hey Lucas, it's Daniela, a friend of Mateus. We're going to the bar tomorrow night to see him play. Want to come?" I promise it's not a trap. Daniela Rocha, 28 years old, bartender at the bar where Mateus played, his best friend for more than 10 years, and the most straightforward person I've ever met. I learned that in the first 5 minutes of conversation, when I met her at the bar door that night. She arrived 3 minutes after me, sized me up from head to toe with the brisk efficiency of someone cataloging data, and said, "You look younger than I imagined. Mateus said you were quiet. I thought you'd be older somehow." "I'm 24, I said. "I know." She opened the bar door like she was opening the door to her own home. "Come in. The beer here is good." The bar was that kind of place that doesn't need some elaborate concept to work, because what it has is accumulated atmosphere. Dark wooden tables with ring marks no one bothered to erase because they're part of the place's history. Low lighting by aesthetic choice, not because of a burned-out bulb. A small stage at the back with a chrome mic stand, a tall wooden stool, a small amplifier that looked older than the bar. The walls had photos of shows and band posters, a visual archive of everyone who had stepped on that stage over the years. Daniela led me to the counter with the familiarity of someone who knows every inch of the place, ordered 2 beers without asking what I wanted, and went to work. She was the bartender on shift that night, and the transition from person in the bar to pro behind the counter happened with the ease of someone who's done it for years. I stayed with my beer, staring at the empty stage. When Mateus came in, he came in different. It's hard to explain without sounding exaggerated, but it's true. The guy who showed up in the morning in that old t-shirt with that disarming ease was the same person who climbed onto that stage, but with something extra I couldn't name right away. He came in from the side of the stage with his guitar on his shoulder, waved to someone in the audience, adjusted the mic to his height with the precision of someone who's done it hundreds of times, pulled the stool, sat down, set the guitar on his lap. And when he started to play, the bar changed temperature. I'm not being metaphorical. There's a specific quality of attention a space acquires when someone who knows what they're doing begins. Conversations dropped in volume, heads turned. Mateus was fully present, without any of the social layers people use when they're around strangers. On stage, he was exactly what he was, effortless, not performing, not calculating, not at all concerned with what anyone might be thinking. He sang a song I didn't know, eyes half closed, and he wasn't performing for anyone. He was simply being. I stayed at the back of the bar drinking slowly, watching. Not in a way I had planned. Not with any conscious intent to let whatever was happening happen. But in that space, with the warm beer in my hand and the music bridging the distance between the stage and where I was, I felt something tighten in the middle of my chest. Not pain, not exactly, but that particular pressure of holding your breath without realizing it. I noticed my hand gripping the bottle harder than necessary. I loosened my fingers. I let go. And I let the thing I'd been calling by other names, discomfort, irritation, an inability to concentrate, the disorientation of a new city, finally have the right name in my head. It was attraction. It was desire. It was exactly what I'd spent entire years learning not to feel, or to feel in ways I could later reinterpret as something else. The name sat in my head for a second before I pushed it back to where it came from. But the second was enough for it to exist. And things that exist, even for a second, don't completely disappear when you try to erase them. They leave a mark somewhere. "He's looking at you." Daniela appeared next to me so quietly I almost spilled my beer. She leaned on the counter watching the stage with the kind of look you use for casual comments. "He's playing," I said, after a second calculating how controlled my voice sounded. "Look at everyone." She drank her beer with the calm of someone not in a hurry. "If you think that was a convincing rebuttal, that's you with yourself." She didn't push, didn't argue, didn't wait for me to respond. She just stayed there, but in a way that left the comment hanging like smoke you can't clear. At the end of the night, Mateus came off the stage with his guitar on his back and walked toward us with that smile, the kind that takes over his whole face like it's the only thing that fits there. He hugged Daniela, who cursed at him playfully for something I didn't get, but that was clearly their thing. Then he looked at me with that direct focus he had. "You came. I wasn't sure you would." "I came," I said, with the creativity the situation allowed me. "Did you like it?" "It was good." And it had been much more than good. and that was the whole problem. Daniela stayed at the apartment that night. Matthias had offered her the couch, and she accepted with the naturalness of someone who already knew that's what would happen before leaving the bar. When we got to the apartment, I went straight to my room. I heard them talking quietly in the living room for a while, then silence. In the morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. But it wasn't Matthias's coffee. It was Daniela, already up, making coffee in the kitchen with the ease of someone who knows the cupboards by heart. Matthias was still asleep. She offered me a cup without asking if I wanted one. We sat on the two little stools at the kitchen counter, and she didn't do that thing where people pretend they're just having coffee while waiting for the day to start. "I'm going to tell you something," she started. No lead-up, and not in the tone of someone about to be nice. "You can choose to ignore it or think about it. I'm not going to be gentle, but I'm also not going to pretend I didn't see what I saw last night, because I've seen it before, and I know what it is." "You didn't see anything," I said. She looked at me with the patience of someone doing you a favor by not rolling their eyes. "Look, I've seen this in maybe 3 people I care about. I know exactly what it looks like. How you look at the floor when someone mentions another guy's name. How you nurse your beer to have a reason to stay in the same spot without saying you want to. How you answer a direct question with something that sounds like an answer, but is just evasion with a period. You're projecting." "Maybe." She sipped her coffee calmly. "But you're not telling me I'm wrong. You're telling me I'm projecting. That's different, and you know the difference." I stared at my cup. There was a pattern at the bottom, coffee grounds, that I examined as if an answer might be hidden there. "It's not what you think it is," I said. "What do you think I think it is?" Silence. "It is," she said, with a gentleness that was harder than anger would have been, because kindness left me nowhere to hide. "You can't even say it out loud to me, a stranger who doesn't owe you anything, and who you'll probably never see again unless you want to. There's nothing to name. Okay." She stood up, washed the cup in the sink with the efficiency of someone who's washed things in a bar for years, turned back to me. "I'll tell you one thing, and then I'll shut up. The people I've known living exactly like you, carrying something they won't name, and spending massive energy making it look like something else. None of them were okay while they stayed that way. I'm not talking about relationships, not about committing to anyone. That's not it. I'm talking about you and yourself, the cost you pay every single day to keep a story that isn't true." She went to grab her things on the couch. Coat, small bag. At the door, she turned once more, with the tone of someone who said everything and won't repeat it. "Matthias doesn't play games," she said. "He's not strategic. He's not deliberately ambiguous. He doesn't like drama. And you probably already know that if you've spent any time actually looking at how he operates, which you have." The apartment door closed with that specific sound of a door closing for good. I went to my room before Matthias woke up, lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling like I was solving a math problem in my head, taking apart everything Daniela said, finding the holes, rebuilding it into something that didn't mean what it meant. It was a skill I had developed over many years, the ability to receive an outside observation and return it in a harmless form. A conditioned response, built brick by brick over years in a place where certain things simply weren't part of the vocabulary of possibilities the city had laid out for you. I was in the middle of that process when I heard Matthias move in the next room. The sound of someone waking up, shifting position in bed, footsteps to the bathroom, the faucet at the specific angle I already knew by heart. I stayed still in my room. What followed was the kitchen's fault. Not literally, but it was there, in that 1.5-meter strip between the counter and the fridge, that everything broke. Matthias woke up, came into the kitchen with bedhead and eyes half closed, stretched with that sound people make when they're really waking up, and saw me there, eating breakfast at the wrong time because I hadn't slept. He said he'd liked that I came to the bar. He said it simply, like it was just a comment, the kind thing someone says to a roommate. "I really like that you were there. I'm different when someone I know is watching. Not that I play better, but I'm more myself. Because there's someone who knows what I'm actually like." He reached for something in the cupboard behind me and put his hand on my shoulder. A second, maybe 2. Brief, natural, The kind of thing he did without thinking, the way some people are physically affectionate as easily as they talk. I froze. Not a choice. The body reacting before the mind, that instinct when you touch something hot and don't expect it. My shoulder tensed. I stepped back with something about needing something from my room, and I left. I closed my door, sat on the edge of my bed with my hands on my knees, and I got to work. Not on design, on rewriting that moment. It was nothing. He does that with everyone. The shoulder thing meant nothing. It's just how affectionate, open people operate. I overreacted because I was tired, because the space is small, because I was disoriented. I convinced myself of every point with the efficiency of someone who had practiced this exercise many times before. So I stayed in the bedroom the rest of the day. What followed were 3 days I call, in my memory, a minefield. And the strangest thing wasn't what Mateus did during those 3 days. It was what he didn't do. I vanished, not physically. I still slept there, still used the bathroom, still showed up in the kitchen when I had to. But I disappeared the way I know how. Monosyllables, eyes on my phone. I'm fine, just swamped with work. Answers that technically responded without saying anything. The thing about withdrawing as a defense is it's exhausting. You learn the sound of someone's footsteps and hold still, breathing slowly, waiting for them to pass before you move. You time how long they're in the bathroom so you don't run into them. You figure out they go for water between 11 and 11:30 before bed, so you go at 11:50. It's a choreography that takes as much focus as anything else. And the weirdest part? The silence I was building in the apartment brought this version of myself I recognized. The one that operates from outside my own body, watching from a distance while days pass with nothing real. I worked. I delivered projects. I answered emails with the neutral professionalism of someone who learned early that work is where you can be without being more than competent. At night, lights off, the guitar gone from behind the wall because Mateus had stopped playing so late, I'd stare at the ceiling with this exhaustion that wasn't tiredness from doing too much, but from holding too much in. The room smelled stale. I hadn't opened the window in 3 days. Mateus tried. The first day, he knocked around 7 and asked if I wanted dinner. He was making pasta and had made enough for 2. I said I wasn't hungry, that I'd already eaten. Lie. I went to the kitchen at 10 to make toast once he was gone. The second day, a text at 3. Are you okay? Just a question mark. No emoji. Someone actually asking, not filling the silence. I replied, I'm okay, thanks, like a customer service bot. He didn't text back, and that was heavier than if he had. The third day, I miscalculated. Went to get water, and he was there making coffee. He looked at me with that gentle directness, the way he asked things because he actually wanted to know. Did I do something? No, I said, voice steady because I'd practiced keeping it steady. Just swamped with work. Deadline. He nodded, didn't push, which was somehow worse than if he had. The apartment changed from uncomfortable with closeness to suffocating with distance. The sounds I'd mapped, guitar, coffee, footsteps, were still there, but different. They were from someone who'd stopped trying. They were exactly what I'd asked for without asking, and they were unbearable in a way I hadn't planned for. I started thinking about leaving the apartment, finding somewhere else in BH where I'd be a stranger again, not someone a stranger had figured out. It's what I knew. When something got impossible, I changed the variables. But I couldn't decide, because leaving meant admitting there was something to run from. And if there was something to run from, then there was something. The fourth day, he stopped trying. Not anger. I'd have known what to do with anger. Something quieter. The apartment kept working normally. He existed, but the silence changed. Before it said, I'm waiting. After it said, I get it, I woke to a different kind of quiet. Not Mateus sleeping. I knew that. It had weight. A sleeping presence. An empty apartment quiet. The coffee was cold enough to mean he'd made it much earlier. He'd left before 7, which never happened. I grabbed my phone for the time. The message was there. He'd sent it at 6:40 before leaving, when I was still asleep, when the city was still in that space before 7. Mateus Viana. It's okay if you need space, but if you want to talk, the door's not locked. I read it once with the eyes of someone just waking up. I read it again when it actually hit me. I read it a third time, knowing that the same sentence meant something different each time. First, it was information. Second, it was an invitation. Third, it was something I couldn't name, but left me standing in the kitchen with cold coffee and my phone for a time I can't measure. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't pressure. It was a door left open. Not wide, not demanding entry. Just open. The difference between locked and unlocked is one says you can't, and the other says it's your choice. He knew what was under every choice I'd made these past weeks. The silence, the timing, the freezing. He wasn't pretending not to know. He was saying the decision was mine, that he wouldn't force it, that there was a space waiting if I wanted it. I got up from the kitchen table. I walked down the hallway with my phone still in my hand. I stopped in front of Mateus's bedroom door, and there I was. Exactly where I was when this story began. What goes through your head at a moment like that? Not clarity. The opposite. A full inventory of every reason knocking is a mistake. What if I mess everything up? What if I ruin living together? What if this is temporary, and I blow something stable for something that'll pass? And underneath, quieter, but harder. What if it's not temporary? That's the one I didn't want to hear. Because if it wasn't temporary, if what I felt was real, was mine, was me, then the whole story I'd built about who I was needed rewriting. And I'd spent 24 years building that story very carefully, with the silent support of a place that never gave me the words to build something else. You want to know why I knocked? Not courage, not revelation. None of those things we imagine for moments like this. The sudden clarity, the certainty that erases fear. None of that. Exhaustion. Plain, simple, devastating tiredness of carrying something too heavy. There's a cost. Being 24 and spending your days calculating how to avoid someone in your own apartment has a cost. Buying noise-canceling headphones so you don't hear a guitar you actually want to has a cost. Rewriting the same moment in your head until it means nothing has a cost that piles up and eventually exceeds the cost of just stopping. I'd hit that point. I knocked. 3 knocks. Firm. Then nothing. For a second nothing happened, and I felt relief and terror equally, that he'd actually gone. That the message was theoretical, that the apartment was empty, and this was just an attempt that failed, that I'd tried, but didn't have to deal with the consequences. Then the door opened. He was in a t-shirt and sweatpants, hair messed up like he'd woken early and hadn't slept enough. He wasn't surprised to see me, like he'd been waiting, like he'd heard my footsteps before the knocks. Maybe he had. Maybe he knew the sound of my walking the way I knew his. "Come in," he said. I went in. His room was exactly what a musician's room looks like. Chaos, but the specific kind from someone who cares about everything except organization. Sheet music in stacks on a desk that was meant for something else. 2 headphones on a small amp. Books with multiple bookmarks. The guitar against the wall exactly where I knew it would be. The window opened onto the alley with soft morning light. That light before the sun commits to the day. We sat on opposite ends of the bed, the only place to sit. Mateus stayed quiet. The kind of quiet of someone leaving space for me to fill. I started talking about the apartment. About maybe needing to move out. About not wanting to make things complicated. About how it might be better if I found somewhere else. I spoke like I was solving a logistics problem. He listened. Didn't interrupt. Didn't push. Didn't try to fix it. When I stopped, silence hung between us for a few seconds. "Do you want to move out?" he asked. I opened my mouth to say yes. That it was practical. That it made sense. And I stopped. Not because I couldn't find words, but the words I found weren't that. What happens when you stop lying to yourself after a long time? It's not freeing like it looks from outside. It's like putting down something very heavy. There's a moment of relief, and then you feel how hard your muscles were working. "No," I said. "I don't want to leave." He waited. "I don't know what I'm doing." My voice came out lower than I planned. I grew up in a place where certain things didn't exist. where I learned not to see them, and I was really good at it, for a long time. Then I moved here, and you're just being yourself all the time, effortlessly, no filter, and I can't fight it anymore. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't, I like you, or I want this. It was raw, the admission of someone who'd spent years denying part of themselves and had run out of energy to keep it up. He didn't answer right away. The silence was different. Not a minefield silence, not pulling back. The silence before something real starts. The kind you only have when you've stopped performing. I know, he said finally, gently. No triumph, no staged shock, no rush to answer. Just someone who'd listened and was confirming they'd heard. He let a moment pass. Then, you didn't need to fight. It wasn't about what I wanted or didn't. It was about the cost he'd seen. Weeks of timing things and silence and headphones and hallway choreography. Someone who'd watched all that and was saying, with the quietness that's how he exists. I saw what that cost. It didn't have to be that hard. I didn't know what to say. So I didn't for a while. Then I started talking differently. Not about what I just admitted, but underneath it. About my hometown. About family. About the specific shame that isn't one blow, but built brick by brick until you stop noticing you're carrying a whole structure you never asked for. He listened, not rushing to respond, but with the patience of someone who knows some things need to be spoken before they can be answered. We talked until dawn. Not about what I'd said yet, just other things. Belo Horizonte, design, a song he was writing and couldn't finish, his student who insisted on Metallica. Two guys starting over with honesty instead of starting from where I'd stopped being honest. It wasn't a fairy tale. I didn't leave a different person with all the answers. But I left at 3 a.m. and went to sleep, and for the first time in weeks, maybe years, I slept without rewriting anything in my head first. Weeks later, thinking about that moment, what stays isn't what happened after. Things did happen, with the slowness and messiness and real uncertainty of things that are actually real, not story-cleaned versions. What stays is that I'd been carrying a weight I didn't know I could put down. That I'd believed so long the weight was me, the structure, what kept me up, that removing it would collapse me. And when I finally did, the opposite happened. My family back home still has what it always had. I'm still a freelance designer in a 2-bedroom apartment in Belo Horizonte with someone who was a stranger. Mateus still plays Fridays, still makes morning coffee with that kettle, still leaves sarcastic notes on the fridge about eggs and screws and our upstairs neighbor. Daniela still stops by, still blunt, still no patience for evasion. But something changed. The guitar comes through the wall and I don't need headphones not to hear it. Sometimes I stop and listen. Not cataloging, not mapping, not using it as data to move away. I listen because I want to. Sounds simple. It's not. Daniela texted a few days later. Short, like her. How was it? I answered with 2 characters. Okay. She replied with a coffee emoji, which in Daniela speak means, welcome to the other side. Some people spend their whole lives in the hallway. Close enough to know what's through the door, to feel the warmth leaking out. But they never knock. Because knocking means admitting the door's real. That what's on the other side is real. That you want in. Wanting to enter somewhere you told yourself doesn't exist is a specific break with your story. It costs. It's frightening in ways without names. It's the difference between who you were before you raised your hand and who you become after you lower it. I know that hallway. I know the weight of my hand 2 centimeters from the wood. I know how the heart beats at the point of no return when you can still walk away. And walking away feels both impossible and the only honest thing. But I knocked. The door opened. What was there was simpler and more complicated and more real than anything I'd imagined standing in that hallway. The only lock was mine. I can't fight that anymore. And I don't need to. If you're stuck in a hallway, if there's a door you keep approaching but never knock on, a name you won't say, a truth you've been softening for years, I can tell you what happens when the door opens. You breathe. Finally, you breathe. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been stuck like that? Have you ever had to fight something you knew was real? I want to read what you say. Leave a like if you connected with this. Subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. These are for people who need to know they're not alone. And thank you truly for getting this far. Until next time.